One thing that kind of blew me away is that after your sermon, Pastor Rick, you gave sort of the financial report for the year.
Yeah.
So you had up there like exactly how much money the church brought in over the calendar year on your PowerPoint in front of the whole audience.
That report, that's a once a year thing, but we publish that in the bulletin every week. How much money we've taken in the last week, up to the month, the year to date, that sort of stuff. We think transparency is a big deal.
So you are open in with your finances. Are you open with what everyone's paid? Does everyone know what everyone's paid?
No, we don't talk about that openly. But
that's, if somebody really wanted to know, we would say this range, but they know where we live. Nobody's getting rich here, okay?
Yeah. Not even you guys, the owners or the leaders or whatever?
You might be interested to know this. Paul doesn't get like a percentage of whatever the takes are on a Sunday. They're a team. They're a team of volunteers, and they're called elders. And their job is they have the power to fire Paul.
Who owns the church?
This group of leaders, we call them elders.
It's like a board of directors.
They set my salary.
Yeah.
Is this a 501c3 nonprofit then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the board of directors controls compensation.
I don't control my salary.
So you have an independent board of directors that sets your salary, sets your salary.
Yeah, right.
Is that right?
That's right. I don't get to say what it is.
Wow. So you could you're the founder and you could be fired.
I could be fired, yes. I'm accountable for my lifestyle and for maintaining the mission of this church. And so, if any of those two things go wrong,
I'm clapping for that one. That was super cool. You guys have an app. So I downloaded your app and it had a calendar on it.
Yeah.
I thought that was super cool. I want to learn about more how you did that. Anyway, you had 1,331 members, 2% growth. 811 people participating in groups, 420 people participating in teams, 39 baptisms, $1.6 million brought in to the Sandy campus, the Draper campus. I think that's super cool. All right, it's now time for your missionary work. Are you ready?
I'll do my best.
Okay, so I'm just going to rifle off a bunch of questions. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so God, what I would say to you about God is, how do you really know there's a God? Because there are all sorts of different people that say they believe in God. Yeah. You can't really know if there's a God. All you can do is have feelings that oftentimes a church will condition you to interpret as that meaning that there's a God. Right. And then you have so many people relying on those feelings to then testify that God's saying 50,000 different things. Sure. So the best any of us can say, if we're being honest, is that we're agnostic, we don't really know, but that we've had these feelings that we've interpreted as being from God. But really what happens is you die and either there is something or there isn't, but we don't know. Yeah. That's what I would, well, what would you guys say to that?
Both Rick and I want to talk about this, but go ahead.
I would say, it's a fascinating starting point to say we know that we don't know. There's a bit of an internal tension there, but all worldviews, whether you're atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, whatever, all worldviews are united by the same questions. We're divided over the answers, but we share the same questions. And there are really four fundamental questions we're all trying to answer. Origin, where did it all come from? Why is there something instead of nothing? Meaning, does my life have value? Yes or no? And is it something that I make up, or does it have value whether I know it or not? Morality, is there a way that I should live? Are there things that I should do even if I really don't want to? Are there things that I should not do even if I really do want to? And then the final question is destiny. Where is all of this headed? Every worldview tries to answer those questions. And if you adopt a worldview, whether it's Hindu, Muslim, atheist, or Christian, it's because you think that worldview provides the best explanation to those questions. And it could take a long time. It could take years to really dig into those questions. But if you look into the question of origin, You have the smartest scientists today. I think about guys like Guth and Vilenkin who said, guys, the universe, it didn't exist, and then all of a sudden it existed. There's something outside of space, matter, and time that brought this into existence. So whatever that causes is by definition immaterial, spaceless, and timeless. If you flip over to the first page of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, that's the kind of cause that's described. And so what we're looking for is, what's the best explanation for reality? And as you tick through those questions, origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, I think that you'll discover that even if you don't land at the Christian God yet, you'll say, really, God existing is a better explanation than all the alternatives put together.
Okay.
How would you explain something coming into existence from nothing?
So where I've landed is I'm comfortable saying I don't know. Like, I don't know. I don't think, I wonder who knows. I associate with a lot of people who said they knew, and it turns out they didn't. They didn't even know what they really believed or were following to a large extent. So I share some of that trauma of feeling very much distrusting of anyone who tells me they know.
Well, on a regular basis, we'll talk about the moral argument for God, for instance. I mean, why do we care if somebody is, the director of a movie is using the casting couch for his own pleasure and taking advantage of these women that are so desperate to have a role in their movie? Why does that matter? I mean, who makes up the rules? And there seems to be a moral compass in every single person. Where'd that come from? It's just not explainable in a materialistic universe. And and on and on. I mean, the cosmological argument, the fine-tuning of the universe, all these things would at least indicate that if I'm at Vegas, I'm betting for a creator, not against a creator.
I think there are a lot of non-religious people who would say, that over time, mankind has evolved to learn lessons. What works, what doesn't, what leads to happiness and fulfillment, what leads to sadness and misery and pain and suffering. And I think you can make a pretty decent case that human morality has evolved over time as we've sort of trial and error learned what behaviors lead to happiness versus not. That's not an argument. That's just that's another way to look at it.
You're something's always, as far as we know, something has always been right and something has always been wrong. So there's never been a time where there's just no moral compass in people that we know of.
You're exactly right. People's perception of morality has evolved and changed over time. Just read a history book. I mean, we get it. Read newspapers, we get it. But the question is, are these moral viewpoints, are they true or are they not true? Are they made up or are they discovered? Are they a matter of opinion, or do they transcend opinion? Like, was there ever a time that it was there might have been times that it's normal to hold the majority of one race as slave, but was there ever a time that was okay? That's a really important question. Has there ever been a time when it was okay to discriminate and subjugate a race simply because of their skin color? Now, it might have been normal, it might have been accepted, but was it okay? And if we say, no, that was never okay, that was never right, we're appealing to a moral standard that is above human opinion, that's above human preference. Where does that come from?
But you would agree that in many cases it was religious institutions that were supporting and bolstering slavery, that were supporting and bolstering
sure,
war
absolutely.
But it was also, but at the same time throughout history, it was Christians who led the way in the abolition of slavery.
But
it's not a question of, and I get where you're asking this, and it's a good question, but it's not a question of who was on the right side. It's, is there a right side?
No, I get that.
Right and wrong, and where does that come from?
For sure. And this isn't to say, I'm a believer that religion has been a net positive contribution to humanity. I do not want to see all religion abolished. I do not think the world is better off if religion disappears. And I'm grateful for what religion's done for me and for what it's done for humanity overall. So that's my position. Having said that, you can read in the Bible where slavery is condoned, where sexism is sort of condoned, where certain types of murder or certain types of genocide are condoned. And we can find ways to sort of justify that or interpret that in different ways. But I would even say religion's views on right and wrong have evolved over time. And so, in some sense, religion's moral evolution is evolving along with mankind's. And I get your point that your belief is that there's a God who has the ultimate standard, and even when we get it wrong, there's still an absolute moral truth. I'm just saying that religion has been learning right along with the rest of us as to what is and isn't good.
Yeah, that may or may not be true, but it remains true that everybody believes there's some things that are right and some things are wrong. And we're saying that that is a proof that God exists, because morality, there's no explanation for morality other than a moral lawgiver that has created us with that.
Some of the things you brought up, we do something during the summer called SMCCU, and we did a whole seminar on, is God a moral monster? There's a great book by the same title by a guy named Paul Copan. A guy like yourself might really enjoy reading it. If you don't like reading, you can listen to lectures by Paul Copan talk about, is God a moral monster, on YouTube. So it's 9:23. We don't have time to get into all of that. But
It's okay.
But let me say this. What we're talking about is there's been different perceptions. The question is this: has what is right and what has wrong, has that ever changed? Now, have perceptions changed by massive groups of people? Of course. But has there ever been a time that it was good to subjugate somebody because of their race? Has there ever been a time that it was good to kill children for fun? Has there ever been a time that it was good to discriminate against someone because of their gender? Not did different groups of people see it differently, but has there ever been a time that it was okay? And we would say no, that there is objective moral truth, that no matter where you go in history, no matter where you go in the world, there are certain things that are wrong and there are certain things that are right, even if everyone agrees, even if no one agrees. These things are right. And the question is not how have people's viewpoints changed. The question is, where does that standard come from? How could you make sense of that in a universe in which there is no God, in which there is no lawgiver? That's the question.
And just to have a slight response.
Yeah.
One of my most profound moments as a parent was when we read the story of Noah to my children, and my daughter says, so God loved all the people on the earth that were around at the time of Noah. And I'm like, yeah, of course he did. And then she's like, and then God killed them all, men, women, and children. And then there are other parts of the Old Testament where people were commanded to kill the entire village, men, women, and children, and the animals. And if they didn't do that, they were punished for not killing the animals, right? Slavery, I think you can find places in the Bible where slavery is condoned. And I think you probably could make arguments for racism from the Bible. Not to keep pursuing this. I
totally get what you're asking. The problem is the difficulty for me is you raise fantastic questions, and we don't have the time to engage all of that.
Yeah.
Is there slavery in the Bible? Of course. Did you know? I mean, did you know that you weren't allowed? That there were times that you had to release the slaves, and when you released them, you had to basically give them wealth. Set them up to where they could thrive economically. That you were not allowed to mistreat a slave. They were not a second-class citizen. And we hear the word slave and we cringe. We're like, that's horrible, because we think of American history and we think of the horrible things that were done. We think of the ships coming from Africa and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about a culture in which there is no centralized government and there is no welfare system, and what happens when all of a sudden a family finds themselves in debt that they can't pay and they can't take care of themselves, and there's an institution that's set up that says, okay, I have to take care of you, I have to pay off all your debts, I'm not allowed to mistreat you, I'm not allowed to abuse you, I can't take advantage of you sexually, I can't demean you in any way, and if I violate any of those, then I'm going to be punished by the people in my community, and God says that that's not okay. And at the end of a certain time, not only do you leave after you fulfilled your obligation, but I have to give you wealth. That is humane, that is loving. This is a way to protect people. What in the world would you do in the third world, in the ancient Near East? Would you prefer that people starve to death? Would you prefer that people just writhe in the ditch of extreme poverty, or provide a way to, in a dignified way, care for people and their needs and their families? And that's what's talked about as slavery in the Old Testament. But we read it, understandably, through the filter of our experiences and the filter of our history, and it's something completely different than what we initially think that it is.
So you're saying that slavery from the Bible is different?
It's right.
From
the
the
Bible never condones slavery, it describes slavery, and it actually puts limits on it.
Oh, yeah.
And
It was a reality in every society across the world.
What do you guys say about the genocide stuff that was in there?
That it's hyperbole. It's hard to say that the Bible condones genocide when the next page you see those people are still there. I mean, so clearly genocide didn't happen. It is common in the ancient Near East to grossly exaggerate what's talked about in battle. And you could say that seems deceptive. It's only deceptive if your audience thinks that you intended to communicate that literally. But we use hyperbole and colloquialisms all the time. We can't relate to those sets of hyperbole and colloquialisms because that's not what we use, but it's incredibly normal in the ancient Near East.
So for you, there wasn't genocide in the Old Testament?
There's not genocide in the Old Testament, certainly not genocide as sanctioned by God. Some of the interesting things about the Yahweh Wars, if you read in the Old Testament, Israel was not allowed to have a standing army. They weren't allowed to take plunder. They weren't allowed to do all of those things. There was really nothing in it for them. And a lot of the places that were like, man, it seems like genocide, these are military outposts that are being engaged. But these people who are supposedly wiped out or the victims of genocide, they keep popping up again and again and again later. There is no genocide in the Old Testament.
Do you guys believe in a literal Adam and Eve?
Yes. I think so, yeah.
As the first humans?
Yeah.
Around how, do you have a sense for when that might have happened?
I'm not a young Earth. I'm not a young Earth creationist.
So evolution's okay?
I don't know what you mean by evolution. Macro,
Humans
micro.
being around for tens or hundreds of thousands
I
of
don't believe
years.
in changes from one species to a completely different species, but I do believe in changes within species.
So you don't believe in evolution?
Not Darwinian.
Not Darwinian
Okay,
evolution. No,
okay.
I'm not.
So the first humans would have been around how
How
long ago? Is it 6,000-ish here? It's what is more...
Let's go with 6,000 to 8,000 years ago.
So kind of Adam and Eve are the first
There
humans.
might have been what some people call humanoids, or people that had human features, but Adam and Eve were the first people with a soul.
Was the flood a global flood that covered the whole earth with water?
I don't know. I have my doubts, although that there are some really smart people who disagree with me on that.
Did the ark have all the animal life on the planet in the ark?
Well, certainly if it's
Not the bird.
a worldwide global flood, then Noah would. See, the interesting thing about Hebrew, Paul and I both had to learn Hebrew and Greek, and we had to translate parts of the Old Testament, New Testament from Hebrew into English, Greek into English. The interesting thing about that word is you read it in the Bible and it says earth. It's really the word for land, and sometimes it means the promised land. It's specifically talking about an area.
So maybe a regional flood
around Israel. Or sometimes it can be used to describe the whole world. I tend to fall in the camp. Paul might be different. I tend to fall in the camp that it's more regional.
A regional thing. Paul?
It's difficult because there's cultures all over the world that have a flood epic. They've told the story of a flood for as long as they can remember. And where did that come from if it wasn't worldwide? But to tell you the truth, because of the difficulty in interpreting the Hebrew text, I'm kind of an agnostic on it.
Don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
When it comes to Christianity, I think there are a few challenges that I have. And I'm just being honest. The first is this idea that we're all made as sinners and flawed, and that the only way that God could, I mean, God's all powerful in theory. The only way that God can make that right is to punish someone to make it right. And I just think, if God's all powerful, there's got to be another way to not have to like stick it to somebody else for what I did. And I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but also if he made me a sinner, then why not just say it's okay to learn? Instead, why even have sin at all? Why not just call it learning, where you just come to this earth and you learn and you learn and you learn and you make mistakes, but you do things right. And then over time you get better and you call it learning instead of calling it sin and then needing to punish someone for the sin. That's kind of my first little dilemma. And this is
with thoughts on that is he did not make us sinners. Adam and Eve came into the world without sin. They chose to rebel against God.
So it's their fault?
Yeah, They have moral responsibility for their choices. And they were, here's a fancy word, the federal headship of Adam and Eve. They represented us in a sense that now, because of their sin continued to be passed down.
So if they hadn't goofed, we would have had a very different mortal existence.
Yeah,
what would that have been like?
Until I came along.
What?
I said, until I came along.
And then you would have ruined
Then
it.
I would have messed it up
Rick
for
would have
everybody.
ruined it for
I'm
everybody.
not saying if I was in their place, I wouldn't have done the same thing they did. I don't know. All we do know.
So sin wasn't God's part of the plan. It just happened.
God did not preordain that they sin. No.
This sounds very much like the types of things Joseph Smith was thinking about in the early 1800s. Like, you're reminding me of much of Mormon theology comes out of these debates, including the teaching that men will not be punished for Adam's transgressions. That's a literal. And it's kind of weird to think about the fact that your religious tradition predates Mormonism. And so some of the things you're going to be teaching me, you're like, well, that's not how God works. And
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we teach a class on what is Christianity, and oftentimes in the class, people are surprised to find out that the fall was not a good thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a terrible thing.
Right.
You're tapping into something. We think the gospel is incredibly good news. It starts with bad news.
Right.
I'm a sinner. And the question is there such thing as justice? Is there a way that things ought to be? Have I broken God's law? Have I violated his character? He's the source of love. He's the source of life. And if I've violated that, if I've rejected his authority and instead said, no, I could be my own authority, it's kind of a big deal. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and he was asking kind of a similar question that you're asking. I said, he's a business owner. I said, imagine a dude just robbed from you. He didn't pay. I mean, he just put you in a bad way. And you go to the court and you make your case, and it's pretty clear that you're in the right, and the judge turns to this guy and says, what do you say? He goes, it's pretty much true. I did those things, but you're a good guy, and Mr. Judge, and why don't you just forgive me? I said, what would you do if the judge said, yeah, this is a great learning experience, and I am a good guy, so I just forgive you? Would you be okay with that? But there's a real cost. There's a law that's broken. Trust and justice has been violated, and that's really what's at the heart of this question.
I do want to also take a little bit of issue with the characterization of God the Father saying to the Son, all right, Son, you're gonna fry for these people.
Because for you guys, God and Jesus are the same.
No,
not the same.
I'm not sure it's the Trinity. So God is one being, three persons in one being. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. So
Jesus came to earth as God. He's always existed as God. And he said that no one takes his life from him. He lays down his life on his own accord. In other words, the Father didn't do this to him. He offered his life as a payment for our sin. And that's a real that's a real different scene than the Father saying, get down there and go to the cross.
Yeah.
A side note, something that didn't make sense to me is how terrible we're supposed to feel that Jesus suffered, how sad or guilty we're supposed to feel that we caused Jesus to suffer. This is Mormon theology, right? Sure. It's like, oh my gosh, I sinned and I contributed to the pain and suffering that Jesus experienced. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, if Jesus is like a superhuman, like he's God, and so like he can take it, and then he dies and he's fine. Like, why is it such this tragic, sad thing that this demigod is sort of like, why am I supposed to feel so sad and guilty when he probably did just fine? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. It's like Jesus is Hercules.
Yeah.
I appreciate the question, but that's coming with a viewpoint on Jesus that's different from what we understand through the New Testament. Jesus isn't a demigod. He's fully God who took on 100% what it means to be human. And so what that means is whatever's true of being God, that's true of Jesus. But whatever's true of being human, that's also true of Jesus. What's essential to being human is true of Jesus. And so he felt pain. He felt all the full sensation of the cross. But the cross wasn't simply about the physical sensation that Jesus had of the spear and the nails and the whips and all of that. It was taking on all the weight of the guilt and the shame that I had earned and that you have earned and that all of humanity have earned. He experienced that, and he took that on and took the feeling of that along with so it's not like he's pretending to feel it. It's not like me wrestling with my son where I pretend that I'm knocked out. He truly, in a very, very real way, experienced all of that, and it was painful. And yet, he's described as for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising his shame.
And I think it's hard for any of us to know how bad or not bad that was for him. We really don't know.
I think it was pretty bad.
But, yeah, but
all sin separates. When we sin, and David, I thought you did a good job about this. It feels like, God turns his back on us when really we separate ourselves from God, just like Adam in the garden hid from God because of sin. And so if all sin separates and all the sin of mankind was on Christ, he felt that kind of separation from God times a billion.
Yeah.
And that's why he would cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it also drew people's attention to the prophecy, Psalm 22, that would help those around watching this crucifixion connect the dots, like this is the promised Messiah, and this is the one suffering servant that came on my behalf, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world.
In Mormonism, there's a real focus on prophets, and because there's two problems with that from my perspective. One was that many of us feel like prophets led us astray. The other problem is I got to this point where I didn't know who to trust, and I just thought, man, if God, I begged, I pleaded for God to talk to me, and I waited for years and decades, never really got any answer other than my feelings. And so I kind of reached this point where I'm like, God, if you're there, come talk to me. I'm waiting. If you got something to say, I'm here. I'm certainly as worthy as Joseph Smith was, and I'm still waiting. So why should we trust Moses or Abraham or Paul or you guys versus just kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak?
I think a real important passage for us in the New Testament is in Hebrews chapter 1. It talks about God spoke to us in various ways at various times, prophets, that sort of thing. But in these last days, he's spoken to us through his Son. So Jesus Christ has come to talk to you, and his words are recorded in the Bible. And so that might not satisfy you. I understand that. You might want something else, but that's what God has provided, his Son as the messenger of God's word, and to reveal who God is by the way he lived his life. that communicates a lot about God and how we can know him. If you choose to refuse that message, that communication, that's up to you. But he has communicated, according to him.
But how do we know Bhagavad Gita, Quran, Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon? Like, there's over half the world that is not resonating with Jesus in the Bible.
Sure. How do we know stuff, right? We're on a quest for truth. We want to know what's true. You want to know what's true. There are two tests for truth: correspondence and coherence. For something to be true, it has to correspond to reality. It has to accommodate all the relevant facts, data, and evidence. And it also has to cohere. It cannot contradict itself or contradict other things that we know are true. So any claim of truth, we're always running through the filter of coherence and correspondence. And I realize I'm kind of going in nerd mode, and it's almost 10 o'clock at night, and it's just too late to do that. But we evaluate these things through logical consistency. We're looking for obvious or subtle contradictions. We evaluate these things through empirical adequacy. Every discipline, math, archaeology, sciences, all of these things, we're evaluating these tests: correspondence and coherence and experiential relevance. That doesn't mean, does it match my experience? It means, can you live it meaningfully and consistently? And that's really the key word. Can you consistently live it? And I can't get into and answer all those questions tonight, and I'll be honest with you, I am running out of gas. But when people ask me those sorts of questions, one of the things that I'll quickly say, it's kind of like buying a house. My wife and I are looking for a house right now. One of the things I want to know is it structurally sound? What's the foundation like? If the foundation is cracked, I don't care how great the kitchen is. If the foundation is cracked, I don't care how wonderful the master bedroom and the bathroom is and all that kind of stuff. Don't care if the foundation is cracked. One of the things that we can do is we can look at the foundational claims of these different worldviews, and do they pass the test of coherence and correspondence? And so we would go through that, and if we had time to go through that, I would be able to explain in a fuller way, in a way that could satisfy emotionally and intellectually, why I'm convinced that Christianity is true and the New Testament is reliable. But the interesting thing about the reliability of Christianity is the New Testament has this kind of like this ejection handle, right? That the Apostle Paul wrote about this. Everything that we believe and everything that we teach hinges not on what someone says, not on a feeling, not on what you think, but a historical event. Did Jesus rise from the dead? And the Apostle Paul went so far to say, hey, if he didn't rise from the dead, all of this is in vain. We are the most pitiful people on the planet. And so one of the most important things, one of the most quickly helpful things we can do is, did Jesus rise from the dead? People are not, in the New Testament and Christianity, historic Orthodox Christianity, you're not asked to kind of just hope that it's true. It's look at it. Is there good reason to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead? And we think the case is strong.
About the inerrancy of the Bible, and I'll just make a couple quick questions.
Yeah.
So I remember studying the Bible. I noticed that in the four Gospels, the sign that was nailed to Jesus' cross is different in all four versions. It says something slightly different.
Slightly different, yeah.
And then I read in two different places where Judas dies in two different ways. In one, he's falls in a field and his bowels burst out. And then another one, I think he kills himself. He hung himself. Yeah. Right? And so there's a lot of people that are like, there's all sorts of inconsistencies in the Bible. How do you respond to that?
Well, just quickly, we would say there's not necessarily inconsistencies. We call these things contradistinctions, and that is that stories told from different viewpoints. If we were to say there was 5,000 people there, and then another gospel says there was, let's say, 2,000 men. Well, those are not contradictory. They just tell it from a different perspective. And one of the proofs, I think, of the New Testament as far as reliability is that obviously they didn't sit in a room together and write the thing together and make sure that their stories lined up. They were independent witnesses of what took place, and it has enough of these contradistinctions to realize, hey, these guys did have their own view of this life of Jesus Christ. And they heard things a little bit differently, but basically the same.
If you were to talk to an investigator, one of the most well-known currently and popular cold case investigators is a guy named J. Warner Wallace. And he and many others would say that this adds credibility. It doesn't take away from the credibility, it actually adds credibility to what they wrote.
Premarital sex, what's the position?
Like when you're having premarital sex?
What's the church's position?
I'm sorry. Told you it's late, I'm running out of
Good one,
gas.
Rick. That's good.
I want to hit.
Stay ahead of this thing.
I want to hit the things Mormons care about most. Premarital sex.
That's a sin that's outside of God's design. It's outside of the best life that He intended for us. He wants that the sex is sacred. That it's a part of a celebration of a covenant of two people coming together and pledging their lives and all of who they are to one another. The Bible isn't down on sex. I don't think Christians are down on sex. We think sex is amazing. We think we have a high view of sex. We reserve it to that covenant relationship.
You know, sometimes I like to think that if any of us who have lived enough years could kind of like just back up the train and say, okay, I see all that what sexual sin, what the Bible calls sexual sin, has done to mankind. We're talking about rape, incest, adultery, broken homes, sexual molestation, anything that is outside the will of God, and just say, wow, if I was now to have an opportunity to design a world, an ethic, a sexual ethic for the world, it'd probably be pretty much what the Bible describes, because this is the best way to live.
What happens if a teenager or an adult engages in premarital sex in this church and it's known? Would they confess it?
They don't have to.
Would they be shamed?
They
Is
would.
there a consequence?
We hope their parents are involved. We hope the parents care. And if they confessed it to a youth pastor or something like that, we would coach them, so to speak, on the benefits of waiting. And
There's no punishment.
definitely offer forgiveness.
John, we don't have to manufacture consequences for choices that aren't good for you. There's a fantastic book called Hooked that talks about what happens in brain chemistry for men and for women through engaging in sexual activity really outside of the confines of these relationships. It was said earlier, our obedience isn't good for God. He doesn't get anything out of it. It's good for us, and it's good for others. So no, we're not gonna punish people. We're not gonna shame people. They don't have to do anything about them. We want something good for them.
Can you imagine a scenario where a 12 or a 14-year-old kid was ever alone with a leader in the church being asked about private matters of sexuality? Would that ever happen here?
No,
It should not happen.
Why would it not happen here?
it's inappropriate.
Yeah.
What's inappropriate about it?
It's none of their business, and
It's none of your business?
That's the world of a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too private, and I wouldn't appreciate it if I was a parent and some adult was doing that.
Now, that's not to say that a teenager may not go to someone they trust and say, hey, I've got some things to talk about. But that leader, that adult, would not keep that in isolation. We want to drive these kids to healthy relationships with their moms and dads, and we want to get them the most help possible. But no, we're not digging in and prying and all that kind of stuff. No.
What if there's an adultery between members of the church? How is that handled?
We do believe in church discipline. First of all, it's important to bring everything into the light and just be honest about it. And if somebody was like saying, well, I don't care what you think, I'll do whatever I want, and they were in any kind of leadership position or something like that, they would be removed from leadership. Well, that's not acceptable. If they represent South Mountain in any way to the watching world, they would be asked not to come here or do that.
This isn't a hypothetical. These are things that happen, and I could tell you from our experiences when that's not something where people are like, woohoo, this was awesome. They're broken. because there are consequences on the other side of that. And so you'll have small group leaders. You'll have people. My wife and I have done this. I'm going out to hang out with him, and we're talking, and man, I'm with you shoulder to shoulder in how you walk forward with this. And my wife is with her, walking shoulder to shoulder, moving forward. How can we support you? How can we love you? We are for you. We want good for you. We're here to support you. There's no guilt. There's no shame. There's no punishment.
There's no punishment for members.
No.
It just could affect your leadership status.
Yeah, there's no
Part of being a
punishment,
leader-
really. Even a
Yeah.
leader, if they're willing to be
Okay.
restored and reconciled, then there's no need to.
It's just if they're like,
Now we're just going to work through this with them.
got it,
Yeah.
got it. Can women be pastors? And if not, why?
Oh, I'll answer that. We believe in the Bible teaches that males should be the leaders in the home, and we try to model that in the church. We do actually believe that the Bible says that men should be elders. It doesn't talk about women elders ever. It only talks about men, and you could make a case that that's cultural in the ancient Middle East, first century. We actually think that there's actually design behind that. I think that if you're talking about pastoral role, yes, women can be pastors in the sense that they do pastoral things. Sometimes women speak here, but not on a regular basis.
So that women should stay silent in the church
No, we don't.
is interpreted as the leader of the pastor, basically.
What's weird is that same word, women should be silent in this church, is the same word used a few sentences above to describe men as well. So that would be, we would have some hermeneutical conversations about that.
It talks
saying
about
women should
church,
be
just
quiet.
order
Yeah.
and allowing people to be heard and done well. You know, just church should not be chaos.
How does tithing or donations work?
So you were here on Sunday, and did you hear us ask for anything?
No, it's very.
If you give, you have to really want to. There are boxes in the back where people can grab an envelope and drop a check or cash if they want to. You can give through the app if you want to. You can give through online. We believe that followers of Christ should be faithful, growing givers. I mean, we don't hide that. I mean, we'll talk about that. But we're never pressuring people to do that. We'll invite people to do that. But it's never a pressure. What you're going to find is, if you were to talk to a lot of people who say about South Mountain, this is my church, these are my people, they are excited to trust God with their finances, and they're excited to invest in what's happening here because they want more people to experience what they've experienced.
And so we look at it as we're inviting people to become a growing giver, and we want them to move past the have to concept and then move into want to. And then ultimately, I think the generous giver is the one who says, I actually get to do this, and they're happy about it. And boy, that's the goal for everybody. You will never get there if it's guilted.
I swear I'm almost done. I grew up in the era of like Jimmy Swaggart, Jerry Falwell, Jim and Tammy Baker, Oral Roberts, and I don't know if those are people.
Sorry.
I don't know if those are people held with respect here or not, and I'm not even judging them per se, but I associated a lot of sort of evangelical Christianity with corruption. How do you know if a church is corrupt? And then how do you guard against that corruption here?
Usually it's accountability. All the people you mentioned have very little accountability. They're running their own show. They put their own family on the board, things like that.
Your board's independent?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no family members on our board. But you see that all the time. If it's on TV, I would be wary.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
For some reason. I don't know what TV does to people, but
So you guys intentionally kind of stay off TV? Because it's a corrupting influence, or?
we don't.
No, I'm not. It's not.
You know what? I would say that we intentionally don't do things that would seek attention. But we'll encourage people, you should question what I say. You should question how I live. And if ever you have a question, email me. Go to Paul. Say, I saw Rick doing this. I heard Rick say that. I should be held to the level of accountability as described in the New Testament. We're doing our best to be transparent.
Let's be
We
clear.
invite
The New
accountability.
Testament says you're not supposed to get rich preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to use the gospel to enrich yourself. You can live a comfortable, nice life, and we do. I think that we are middle class people, and as far as pastors, we're paid well and fairly, and so we're not complaining. We're not pretending that we live in poverty. We don't. But at the same time, we're not trying to enrich ourselves, like getting people to buy our book or all that kind of stuff. That's just not happening.
Real quickly, there's a female pastor that's kind of prominent on the internet podcast. What's her name?
Which one? Joyce Meyer?
Yeah, Joyce. What do you guys think about that? Like, is she like...
Her family is her board, and so
It's another one of the... Okay. But are there evangelical Christian churches that do have female pastors?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So there's genuine disagreement
Yeah.
in evangelicalism.
So that's just a choice.
We would say this: if you take what she says seriously, it will not be good for your long-term.
Joyce.
Yes, it will not be good for your long-term development as a follower of Jesus.
But in terms of the genuine disagreement, do you have respect for... Are there
Yes.
female pastors you have respect for? And
Listen, she teaches things that...
not her. I'm talking about others.
But let me say this: she teaches things that makes me want to throw up in my mouth. And yet, if you listen to her story, how she overcame abuse, how can you not respect her? And so I have tremendous respect for many things that she's overcome. I disagree with how she represents the New Testament and Jesus Christ.
And her model, the way her church is set up, is something that would make us very nervous.
But are there evangelical churches with female pastors that you would respect?
We respect them.
Willow
Yeah,
Creek
we
Community
respectfully
Church in
disagree.
Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington, Illinois, just outside of Chicago.
Has a female pastors that you respect. That's just a decision.
That'd be a church that we respect. This is a great church.
But it's just
Everybody doesn't have to agree with us, and especially in non-essential things like that. And we're still in the family of God, loving Jesus together. So we're not, going to die on every single hill. We do embrace fellowship with other believers that don't agree on everything with us.
And last question, who goes to hell? Like if someone is born and dies in India and never hears about Jesus, do they go to hell? If I die and I don't go to an evangelical Christian church and profess belief, do I go to hell? Like who goes to hell?
People that reject God go to hell.
I mean, what does it mean to
In other
reject
words,
God?
people who don't want to spend, who don't want to bow the knee to God, they don't respect God for Him being God, and they basically remain in rebellion against God, saying, I will be my own authority. I resist the offer of love from God, and I reject His accountability. I just simply don't want to bow to that.
What if you just kind of die not knowing, kind of unsure?
Well, we trust that God is just. I mean, if He's the author of morality, He's the author of justice. And one of the things I'm really, really sure about is He won't do something that's not right, not just.
So maybe there's some accommodation for people that just don't have the chance or the time.
Perhaps. I don't know what that is. The Bible doesn't cover that topic.
All right. Well, you guys have been really good sports. So thank you so much.
Hey, John, we just want to say thank you for letting us host you tonight, and thank you for inviting people from your community and your audience. And I've got Kelly is going to bring you something. We just want to say, hey, thanks for spending this night with us, a little longer than we anticipated.
I'm so sorry.
As a gift for your office, you might enjoy using that as a backdrop.
Oh, you want me to open it? Open it here?
Video.
You should.
Thank you. While I'm doing this, will you offer my listening audience a final testimony? If somebody's open to what you've been saying tonight, if somebody wants to consider, what was some final words you'd give to our listening audience about, oh my gosh, what is this? It's a microphone.
There you go.
Oh, look at that, everybody.
So when you're on Facebook Live, it has something good to look at.
That's so beautiful. Look at that, everybody. Thank you so much. That's so sweet. All right. Thank you so much.
Don't forget to grab.
Thank you so much. Give a final testimony to my listeners, an invitation for those who want to learn more.
Yeah, I would encourage you to come visit any of our South Mountain Community Church campuses, and the reason why is because we care about you and we care about the truth. And you'll have plenty of room to take the time you need to discover God from the Bible. And if you choose not to do that, you're still welcome here. You can kick the tires as long as you want to. And we're happy to have you.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much for your patience. Thanks to all our listening audience and our viewing audience for joining us today on Mormon Stories. I want to thank everyone who made this possible, and specifically Cody Layton and Emily Robbins. Who else am I forgetting? Who else was an important part of making this happen? Anyone else I'm forgetting? Cody? Is that good? All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for being such good sports. I really wish you the best. I think this is a place I would heartily recommend to people who are seeking a spiritual life and a life to follow Jesus. So bless you. All the success in the world. Thanks for being good sports. And I hope we can stay in touch. Is that all right? Thank you so much, everybody. You guys have a good night. Drive safely.